In the summer of 1920, a woman gave birth to twins in New York City. One of the twins died at birth. The other was a girl. She weighed approximately 2 pounds. She was born weeks too early, too small to regulate her own temperature, too fragile to feed, too underdeveloped for her lungs to work reliably. Her father held her in one hand. The hospital told the family there was nothing to be done. Premature babies this small did not survive. That was simply the medical reality of 1920. There were no neonatal intensive care units. There were no incubators in hospitals. There was no protocol for keeping a premature infant alive because the medical establishment had decided the project was not worth pursuing. The father was told to take his daughter home and let her die comfortably. Instead, he took her to Coney Island. Not because he had lost his mind, because there was a man at Coney Island who was doing something no hospital in America would do. Keeping premature babies alive in incubators, funded by charging visitors 25 cents to look at them through a window. The baby's name was Lucille Horn. She survived. She lived into her 90s, and the man who saved her, and 6,500 other premature infants over the course of 40 years, operated under a carnival barker's sign that read, "Living Babies in Incubators." This is the story of Martin County. It is one of the strangest stories in the history of medicine. And it ends with a question that is worth sitting with. Why did a sideshow do what hospitals refused to do? The incubator was not a new invention in 1900. It had been developed in France in the 1880s. The credit goes to a French obstetrician named Étienne Stéphane Tarnier, who, having observed warming chambers used for poultry at the Paris Zoo, had similar chambers constructed for premature infants at the Maternité Hospital in Paris. The logic was straightforward. Premature infants cannot regulate their own body temperature, and a controlled warm environment dramatically improved their chances of survival. The first of these warm air incubators, introduced at l'Hôpital Paris Maternité in 1880, showed clear results. Remarkably, all 6 of the first babies placed in Tarnier incubators survived. Pierre Boudin, a colleague of Tarnier, began publishing reports on the incubator's successes in 1888. The technology worked. The evidence was clear. The American medical establishment looked at this evidence and largely declined to be interested. The reasons were a combination of fatalism, resource scarcity, and a particular form of medical conservatism that treated premature infants as a category of patient not worth investing in. They were going to die. The equipment was expensive. The nursing care was intensive. Better to direct resources toward patients who could actually be saved. Martin County was not deterred by this logic because Martin County operated outside the medical establishment entirely. County had trained in Germany and studied with Pierre Boudin himself. He had seen the incubators work. In 1896, he and Boudin took 6 incubators to the World's Fair in Berlin, borrowed several premature babies from a local hospital, and displayed them to the public. More than 100,000 people paid to see the tiny babies. The babies received medical care funded entirely by those ticket sales. All 6 survived. Cooney understood something the hospital administrators did not or would not act on. The public would pay to see premature babies, and the money the public paid could fund the medical care those babies needed. In 1903, he brought the model to America. He set up a permanent exhibit at Coney Island's Luna Park, between the Congo village and the Tyrolean yodelers. The sign above the entrance read Kinderbrutenstalt, child hatchery. Nurses tended to babies as an enraptured public looked on. Like any other amusement, the premature baby exhibits included carnival barkers, who tried to lure the public to come see the babies. Ticket proceeds went to help the preemies. Inside, the atmosphere was nothing like the Midway. Nurses wore starched white uniforms. Doctors wore medical coats. The incubators were clean, temperature-controlled, monitored. County emphasized breast milk. He employed 5 wet nurses to feed the infants. He insisted on hygiene standards that rivaled or exceeded those in the hospitals that had declined to treat these babies. Most significantly, he never charged the parents a penny. The visitors paid. The parents did not. Cooney's Coney Island exhibit was functionally the first free neonatal intensive care unit in America, funded by the curiosity of the general public. For 40 years, from 1903 to 1943, this was how premature babies in New York City were saved. Hospitals transferred their most fragile premature infants to Coney Island. Parents who had been told to take their children home and let them die brought them instead to an amusement park. By 1939, County had treated more than 8,000 babies and saved the lives of 6,500. One of them was his own daughter, who had weighed less than 3 pounds at birth. County operated under constant criticism and numerous attempts to shut down his exhibit, which many considered to be against maternal nature. Against maternal nature. The argument was that displaying babies for public viewing was degrading, inappropriate, sensationalizing. The people making this argument were the same medical establishment that had refused to treat premature babies in the first place. The babies Cooney saved did not, as far as the record shows, suffer from having been viewed through a window at Coney Island. They grew up, they had children, they lived. Some of them came back to meet Cooney as adults. In 1934, he organized a reunion of the premature babies he had saved during the Chicago World's Fair the previous summer. 41 of the 58 babies he had treated returned with their mothers. The event was broadcast on live radio. The Luna Park exhibit closed in 1943. It closed because it was no longer necessary. American hospitals had finally begun adopting the incubator methods that Cooney had been demonstrating for 4 decades. The medical establishment had arrived at last at the same conclusion that a German-trained showman had reached in 1896. Cooney's techniques were advanced for the time, including his emphasis on breast milk and his strictness about hygiene. But some of his methods were unconventional. Most hospital doctors believed that contact with premature babies should be kept to a minimum to reduce infection risk. But Cooney encouraged his nurses to take the babies out of the incubators to hug and kiss them, believing they responded to affection. What he believed about affection is now standard practice in neonatal care. The research confirming it came decades after Cooney had simply insisted on it. This is the question this story leaves you with. Why did a sideshow do what hospitals refused to do? The incubator technology was available, the evidence it worked was published, the need was obvious. Premature infants were dying in every city in America in numbers that were neither natural nor inevitable. The gap between what was known and what was done was not filled by the institutions that existed for exactly that purpose. It was filled by a man who understood that if you put the babies where people could see them, people would pay to keep them alive. Martin Couney died in 1950. The New York Times published his obituary. He retired to a small house in a neighborhood called Seagate at the edge of Coney Island, not far from where 6,500 babies had taken their first reliable breaths. The neonatal intensive care unit is now considered one of the foundational institutions of modern pediatric medicine. It developed from the methods Couney demonstrated for 40 years, while the medical establishment called it a sideshow. Subscribe if you want to keep following this. Every week, the history that changes what you thought you knew about how things came to be the way they are.